Part 11. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 103. After taking a look at the innate sacred and demon embryos that had been suppressed to less than 1 light year, Xuanhuan withdrew from the state of heart and heaven. Standing on the top of Buzhu Mountain, Xuanhuan could clearly feel that the prehistoric world at this time, including the already much thinner spiritual energy of heaven and earth, was completely different from before. If the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the previous prehistoric world was water, then the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the prehistoric world at this time was ice. The most essential essence has not changed, but its form has undergone earth-shaking changes. Even a little ice slag is enough to break the water of the infinite sea water. And no matter how much sea water there is, it can't do anything to the 10,000-year-old glaciers in the sea, and it may even become the nutrients for its continuous growth. Although he hasn't tried it yet, Xuanhuan feels that the current spiritual energy of heaven and earth, and even some of the rules of the prehistoric world, can already show some extraordinary power in the real world. Xuanhuan's mouth curled slightly, his figure disappeared in an instant, and his mind returned to the body of the real world. Slowly opening his eyes and looking at the rising sun, Xuanhuan did not feel that only 1 day had passed. You know, in the prehistoric world, more than billions of years had passed. Xuanhuan's right hand was drooping, and he pinched repeatedly, and soon he got the result. More than 7 days had passed. If Xuanhuan had not been able to rely on the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to maintain his health, he would have become extremely weak even if he did not die at this time. Well, there is also. Do you think that he can get the time by pinching the hand seal, and think that his calculation method is extraordinary? Well, that's completely overthinking. He was just pinching randomly, and as for knowing the time, it was just the result of his communicating with the heaven and earth consciousness of this small world with his mind. Well, you said there is no one else here, who is he pretending to be? Well, don't you know that sometimes performances don't need an audience? Moreover, that was Xuanhuan's expectation. He hoped that one day, the prehistoric world would be able to give birth to a true deduction method, to deduce all the cause and effect information in the world, to deduce the changes of heaven and earth, and the future direction. Next, Xuanhuan did not rush to take the next step, but cooked himself and had a delicious meal, and then walked out of the villa leisurely. Whether it can be done or not, it still needs to be verified again. This is the prudent behavior that adults should have. Even if you think it will definitely succeed, you still need to conduct corresponding verification. Sometimes you think that it is really just your feeling, and there may be something completely opposite to the facts. This time, Xuanhuan walked out of the villa for dozens of meters before he came to the border of the small world. The successive transformation of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth naturally made the power of the small world soar, expanding a distance of 20 or 30 meters. After coming to the outside of the small world, Xuanhuan's mind was slightly concentrated, and a ball of spiritual energy of heaven and earth was detained from the small world. In an instant, the rules of the world around them were in turmoil, and a terrifying force of oppression enveloped the spiritual energy of the world. Buzz. The spiritual energy of the world trembled slightly, and a mysterious spiritual light bloomed, instantly resisting the suppression of the rules of the world. Seeing this situation, Xuanhuan was delighted, and it seemed that it was successful. But in the next moment, as if provoked, the originally dead rules of the world on Blue Star actually became slightly active, and a more powerful force enveloped it. Buzz, hum. The spiritual energy of the world also began to tremble violently. Although it was very difficult, it finally took on the pressure from the rules of the world in the real world. Of course, in fact, the pressure from the world, in addition to the continuous transformation of the spiritual energy of the world, the solidity and toughness have been greatly enhanced, which can withstand greater pressure. There is more pressure, which is poured into the small world by the spiritual energy of the world through the resonance of the spiritual energy of the world in the small world. It can be said that the small world bears most of the pressure from the rules of the world in the world of Blue Star. In addition, the source of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, after all, comes from Xuanhuan, a creature in the Blue Star world. Although it is a force belonging to the idealistic side, it has already gone in a direction contrary to the Blue Star. However, as long as Xuanhuan does not completely transcend the Blue Star world, there will always be a certain connection between the two, and they can be integrated to a certain extent. Well, if Xuanhuan really transcends, he will probably spread the spiritual energy of heaven and earth directly throughout the Blue Star world, and the Blue Star world can only bear it obediently. At this moment, with Xuanhuan as the link, the small world is under greater pressure, and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth can finally exist in the Blue Star world for a long time. But, looking at the spiritual energy of heaven and earth that has been shining in his hand, Xuanhuan frowned slightly again. Isn't this too ostentatious? After a moment of contemplation, Xuanhuan's mind moved, and suddenly more spiritual energy of heaven and earth was drawn by him and merged into the group of spiritual energy in his hand. Buzz! The aura ball in Xuanhuan's hand began to expand rapidly. In just a breath of time, it had expanded to about 1 meter. As the aura ball expanded, the aura light it emitted became more dazzling in an instant. However, this made Xuanhuan's eyes light up. Just because, although the spiritual light of the spiritual energy is more dazzling, it is only concentrated on the periphery of the spiritual energy group. In the center of the spiritual energy group, because of the pressure from the peripheral spiritual energy, it has become much calmer and more stable, with only a little spiritual light flashing, which cannot even be detected if you don't pay attention. This made Xuanhuan happy, and instantly attracted more spiritual energy of heaven and earth. As the spiritual energy group continued to expand, the spiritual light of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the center was constantly weakening at a speed visible to the naked eye. Finally, when the spiritual energy group expanded to about 10 meters, the spiritual energy in the center of a fist had regained stability, and the spiritual light was hidden again, dispersing into the invisible. It's done. Seeing the scene in front of him, Xuanhuan slapped his hand and waved it vigorously, shouting with joy. In fact, it was fortunate that the prehistoric world had undergone 2 advanced transformations in a row this time, which made the spiritual energy of heaven and earth able to withstand the oppressive force of the rules of heaven and earth. If, as Xuanhuan had thought before, he only advanced once and reached the 6th level of heaven and earth spiritual energy, he might be able to last longer, but he would definitely not be able to survive in the Blue Star world forever. Just like the 7th level of heaven and earth spiritual energy now, it can only survive in the Blue Star world completely if the small world shares the pressure. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 104. After confirming the result, Xuanhuan also waved his hand, dispersing the aura of heaven and earth that was captured by him, and turned back to the villa. After returning to the villa, Xuanhuan glanced at a villa behind the villa, and an inexplicable smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Xian even sat on the deck chair in the center of the villa, and his mind quickly escaped into the ancient world, following its connection with the Buzhu Mountain Little World, and descended into the Buzhu Mountain Little World. While Xuanhuan was doing the experiment, he was in the villa diagonally behind Xuanhuan's villa. But there was a man and a woman sitting in the hall talking to each other. I don't know when it will happen. I think that person stays in the villa all the time except for shopping. Is there anything to monitor? I can't control him directly. To avoid spending manpower and material resources on surveillance, Xiao Zhang came to me to show off the day before yesterday, saying that his position was about to change. Really? Alas. It's nothing, but if I stay here like this, I'm going to get moldy. Gently holding the woman's shoulders, the man complained dissatisfiedly. Okay, Hiking. Don't complain so much. It's not like you don't know the importance of that person. As the first person to communicate with the prehistoric world, no one knows whether it is because of something special about him or because this small world is special. What exactly did it gain? Does it have any decisive trump card? Moreover, judging from what he did, there was no tendency to endanger the country, society, or the people of China. Naturally, there is no need or reason to take tough measures against it. However, whether it is the person himself or the reasons for this small world, necessary surveillance is still necessary. Moreover, doesn't sending us to monitor such an important person represent the country's trust in us? The country will never mistreat those who have made meritorious deeds. The woman smiled softly, rolled her eyes at the man, and leaned against the man with a very relaxed expression. Rather than fighting and killing in the outside world and dealing with those weird ghosts, she would rather live an ordinary life with her beloved man as she does now. The people sent to monitor Yuan Meng must not be able to do so blatantly. And if you want to keep a secret and casual surveillance, you would naturally pretend to be Yuan Meng's neighbor. In other words, there is no need to dress up deliberately. After all, with the energy of the organization, it is very easy to change the owner of the villa naturally. No, a newlywed couple bought that villa as a new house. You see, from the villa to the residence, and even the relationship between the newlyweds, everything is real. Well, it's not like in those movies and TV shows where two police officers are required to pretend to be a couple to conduct surveillance or contact suspects. This is especially unnecessary when the surveillance target is suspected to have a very gentle personality but needs to persist for a long time. After all, don't couples exist in a country's system? What's more, what's fake is fake. Even if they pretend to look like a couple, can they still be compared to a real couple? Even this couple, apart from their deeper identities and their intention to monitor Yuan Meng, did not even deliberately conceal their identities as national civil servants, and even sometimes went to work in the city. Well, their work seems to be very easy. They stay in the villa most of the time. Only occasionally does one of them leave the villa and return to the city to work, or report. In their own words, that is their job. They are a very leisurely clerk. Except for some special circumstances, they can only handle it through the computer. As for the specifics? Well, I can only say that everyone who understands understands. Moreover, aren't there some people who haven't worked for decades and still receive wages? However, in this small world controlled by Yuan Meng, monitoring Yuan Meng is really unreasonable. It depends on Yuan Meng's mood. At this time, when the couple was chatting with each other, they also talked about some of the news they had heard before. Hiking, say. Is this world about to change again? Are you talking about the change of aura? Then who knows? The world is becoming more and more incomprehensible. But no matter what, if the sky falls, there will still be someone taller to hold it up. The most important thing for us now is to improve our own strength. When our strength is high, no matter what happens, we can deal with it calmly. Well, that's true. In recent times, the entire small world above China, or the aura of heaven and earth in the small world, has been undergoing inexplicable changes. Although this change is invisible, there are no instruments that can observe it. However, when breathing in the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, it becomes a little difficult, and a group of practitioners can still sense it a little. This is because the aura of heaven and earth has become more textured after 2 consecutive transformations. It requires a stronger spirit to pull it. Although this change is not obvious, it is no longer a small problem if it affects all the small worlds in China. It's a pity that the spiritual energy of heaven and earth is a newly emerged force on the spiritual side. Conventional methods cannot effectively observe it at all, and naturally it is even less noticeable where the problem lies. The only thing that made everyone slightly happy was that the power of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth seemed to have become much stronger. Even in the Blue Star world, the Yuanli in the bodies of many practitioners began to become restless. These changes made all the practitioners mutter in their hearts, could it be that the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was going to hide again? Could it be that the prehistoric world noticed the outflow of spiritual energy and wanted to take it back? Otherwise, why did it suddenly become difficult to breathe in and out the spiritual energy of heaven and earth? But this doesn't make sense. It seems that the power of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth has also increased a lot. Could it be that because the prehistoric world noticed this, the power of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth has increased? In fact, according to the analysis that many small worlds have expanded outward more or less at the same time, perhaps the prehistoric world noticed the outflow of spiritual energy, but it definitely has no intention of stopping it. Maybe, on the contrary, there is an intention to incorporate the Blue Star world into the prehistoric world system. Otherwise, it cannot explain why the power of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth has increased. And those small worlds with spiritual energy have all expanded to varying degrees, while other small worlds have not changed at all. But no matter what the details are, they can only wait anxiously for the changes to occur, and cannot have any influence or interference on them. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 105. Chapter 108 Resurrection of Spiritual Energy. Boom. Finally, at a certain moment, accompanied by a dull roar, the entire Qingping Mountain scenic area was slightly shaken for a moment. The startled tourists looked around, thinking that this area, which had never experienced an earthquake, had experienced a major earthquake at this moment. However, after a panic, the tourists gradually calmed down. Because the entire Qingping Mountain scenic area, although there was still a faint sense of shaking, did not cause much damage. Even the water in the water cup only had a few ripples, but did not spill at all. And just when everyone was still in shock and talking to each other, something even more shocking happened. On the top of Qingping Mountain, a beam of light suddenly shot up into the sky, attracting everyone's attention. Even in the city, this beam of light could be clearly seen, causing great shock to the people. What is this? Shenzhou's new laser weapon. Aliens invade the Earth. There were many different opinions at once, and everyone stopped what they were doing and looked in the direction of Qingping Mountain, looking at the beam of light rising into the sky. People at home walked out of their homes, and there were many figures standing at the gates of every household and every community. People who were driving stopped their cars, and all the roads were filled with people stopping to watch. Even the students in school walked out of the classroom one after another, and the teachers did not mean to stop them, because they were equally curious about the beam of light. And this kind of thing that may not happen again in a lifetime, if you miss it, it is really a lifelong regret. At this moment, the workers at work, the clerks in the office, whether they are the presidents of large companies or ordinary vendors. At this moment, everyone's eyes are all focused on the location of Qingping Mountain, the beam of light rising into the sky. After reaching a height that is beyond the reach of the naked eye, the beam of light that rose into the sky did not continue to rise, and it did not dissipate. Instead, it suddenly spread outward at an astonishing speed, submerging everything along the way. Whether it was rocks and land, trees and flowers, birds, beasts, insects, fish, or panicked humans, they were all covered by the light. This naturally caused people to panic again, and they ran away one after another, but how could they catch up with the speed of the light? However, in just a breath of time, the tourists in Qingping Mountain scenic area were completely swallowed up by the light before they ran a few steps. Although the people farther away could run a few more breaths, they were still a little too slow compared to the speed of the light expansion, and they were soon swallowed up by the light. After the initial panic, the people swallowed by the light found that they were not hurt at all. Instead, they felt a refreshing airflow passing through their bodies, making them feel comfortable all over, and then they gradually calmed down. And the light that submerged everyone, after swallowing everyone, immediately swept over everyone's body again, and quickly spread to the distance. What's going on? Looking at the light wall going away, the sky and the earth without any changes, everyone looked at each other in confusion, completely unable to figure out what happened. Well, the sky is still changing. If you look closely, there is a layer of light film above the sky, but it is not obvious. Well, it seems that there are changes. Some people with keen perception always feel that there is something more in the air, and there is a comfortable breath that permeates the air around them. What's changed? Well, I can't tell, I always feel that there is something more in the air. Ah! Could it be that some poisonous gas has spread? For a moment, everyone around was terrified, looking around, fearing that someone would be poisoned and fall to the ground. If so, they would definitely not be able to escape. No. That's not what I meant. Although I don't know what's extra in the air, I can feel that it shouldn't be bad for humans. Oh, is that so? The people around couldn't tell the truth from the false for a while, but they became half believing and half doubting, no longer as anxious as before. The ordinary people around didn't know what was going on, but the special departments of Shenzhou, including some high-level people who had practiced, knew clearly what was extra in the air around them. The extra in the air was nothing but the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. And the light column that shot up into the sky was the result of the spiritual energy dissipating and colliding violently with the rules of heaven and earth in the surrounding blue star world. In order to fight against the oppression of the rules of heaven and earth in the blue star world, the endless spiritual energy of heaven and earth released its power and bloomed with infinite spiritual light, which led to the appearance of the spiritual light column, this strange phenomenon. And with the spread of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the periphery continued to stimulate power and bloom spiritual light because of the fight against the rules of heaven and earth in the blue star world. From the outside, it looked like a shockwave that was emitting endless light and drowning everything, destroying everything around it, which naturally caused everyone to panic. However, after the spiritual energy of heaven and earth completely spread, only the outermost layer of spiritual energy of heaven and earth continued to emit spiritual light. From the perspective of the people inside, it was a moving wall of light. From the overall perspective, it was like a huge light shield turned upside down, covering the entire Qingping Mountain scenic area, including the surrounding cities, all of which looked extremely magnificent and mysterious. It was like the magical spells performed by immortals and Buddhas in legends, and also like the energy shields of future technologies in human imagination. This. In the villa behind Yuan Meng's villa, Yu's hiking and Wang Xinhui were standing on a platform on the top of the villa, staring up at the light shield covering the entire Qingping Mountain, speechless. In fact, it was not just them, including the high-level officials in the city, all those who knew some inside information, were all stunned to watch all this, feeling the spiritual energy of heaven and earth around them. At this moment, everyone had only one thought in their hearts. Or a revival. However, although they were shocked by the revival of spiritual energy, they were well prepared. Soon, the relevant departments of Shenzhou issued orders and began to appease the people in an orderly manner. As for the excuse. In this situation, what excuse can you find? You can only tell the truth. Of course, this truth is also selective. For example, the country naturally concealed the small world and the strange ghosts. As for the revival of spiritual energy, it is about to enter an era where technology and practice coexist. However, it did not conceal much. After all, the current situation cannot be concealed. Thanks to the book Friend Just Empty Wine Crossing Without Love for the 100 Rewards. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 106. In addition, the country also took out the basic cultivation methods that had been prepared long ago, as well as various theoretical guidance on sensing the heaven and earth and creating exercises, and directly popularized them to the whole people. Obviously, when the country discovered the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, it was already prepared to popularize cultivation. It was just because before, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth only existed in the small world, and there was no condition for popularizing cultivation. It is impossible to let everyone enter the small world to practice, right? That is simply unrealistic. And if only a part of people enter, it will definitely cause dissatisfaction among other people, and even cause social unrest. While popularizing the knowledge of cultivation among the whole people, the country has included all of this in the school textbooks, and sent some people who have achieved success in cultivation to enter the school for corresponding guidance. Although this made the hearts of many people become a little impetuous, they gradually restored order under the rapid handling of the country. Of course, if you want to recover completely, it still takes a certain amount of time to settle. After all, this is real cultivation, which is possible to achieve immortality, or even become a godlike existence. Especially, in this land of China where there have been legends of cultivation since ancient times, this real cultivation suddenly broke into everyone's eyes. How could they not be extremely excited? If everyone was indifferent, that would be really abnormal. However, after everyone saw the popularized exercises handed down by the country, they all showed disappointment. Because this is just a meditation method to empty the mind and sense the heaven and earth, which can't make people second to heaven, second to earth, and second to air. And after everyone saw the introduction of the creation of exercises, they all became excited. If you say that people in today's society have not read many online novels, there must be some. However, if you say that you don't know it at all, it's rare. Even if you are a conservative person, he must have come into contact with martial arts novels. And like Liao Zai and Feng Shen, it is impossible to know nothing, especially Journey to the West, which is also one of the 4 great classics. It is even more well known, and even faintly spread throughout the entire Blue Star. Well, don't worry about why Blue Star also has Journey to the West. The question is the similarity of parallel worlds. As for the creation of skills, probably everyone has their own ideas, and no one thinks that they are worse than others. If you can't do anything else, can you not be better than others just by relying on wild imagination? As for bragging, it seems that everyone can't do it. You said that a blink of your eye is the birth and death of the universe. I also said that when I blow it out in one breath, it is the endless multiplicity that disappears. However, before they can be happy for long, they see the summary later. Wild imagination and endless bragging can only give you a rough framework. As for the content, it requires a lot of theoretical knowledge to improve it bit by bit. In other words, even if your imagination is greater than the sky, if your knowledge reserve is not enough, then in the end, the skills you can get are just high-end. Inside, it is just a castle in the air and a piece of rotten cotton in the brocade. In terms of practice efficiency, it may not even be as good as an ordinary martial arts skill. Well, it's just that nonsense. Even if you have entered the cultivation era, you still need to study hard for me. Even if you can't understand it all, you still need to read it thoroughly for me. Otherwise, when you sense the world, your brain is blank and you don't have any knowledge accumulation, then what you can get in the end? Well, it's not much better than the popular meditation method. After reading the theoretical guidance on the creation of the practice method popularized by the country, there was an immediate wailing. This world is really unfriendly to poor students. In fact, the creation of the practice method is not as harsh as everyone imagines. After all, theoretically speaking, what the human brain stores is actually far beyond imagination, and even an inadvertent glance, what you see, will be engraved in the cerebral cortex. However, due to the degree of development of the human brain, it is impossible to remember everything in detail. However, this does not mean that humans do not remember, but they can't remember it. So, if you only rely on rote knowledge to perfect the creation of the practice method, you only need to look through it roughly, and it will be enough. Humans cannot recall everything, but it does not represent a world, nor can they extract this knowledge from human subconsciousness. Even the illusory prehistoric world can easily do this. However, if you rely on these methods without in-depth understanding to perfect the practice, then all you can get is a mechanical, stereotyped, and streamlined product. And if you have a deep understanding and have your own understanding, then what you can get is naturally a private customization that is most suitable for your personal method. Compared with the two, although both are complete practices, in terms of their effectiveness, it is obvious that there is a world of difference. Of course, people nowadays, including the country and those who have achieved success in practice, do not know this yet. And Yuan Meng has no intention of spreading this. After all, for Yuan Meng, it is certainly a happy thing to be able to gain more knowledge from a person. But personal understanding is particularly important to Yuan Meng. After all, a person's unique understanding may lead to his own path and different rules. That is what is really important to Yuan Meng and the prehistoric world. Therefore, Yuan Meng will not correct the need for everyone to study seriously. After all, what he wants is everyone's different understanding of knowledge. If that were the case, I am afraid that many people would have started to create exercises. After all, learning knowledge is naturally no problem for students. But for some adults who have graduated, it is actually a bit uncomfortable. They would rather create exercises that can be practiced first, and then slowly find ways to make up for the shortcomings. However, it is a pity that the creation of exercises needs to be carried out in the small world. The rules in the small world are more loose and active, and more in line with the prehistoric world. After all, the consciousness of heaven and earth in it is an extension of the heavenly way of the prehistoric world. However, the rules of heaven and earth in the blue star world are extremely rigorous, and are in a state of silence, which is not conducive to human perception of the rules of heaven and earth. The current blue star, well, or the area covered by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, is actually not much different from other places on blue star. It just has more spiritual energy of heaven and earth, and can barely use some weaker extraordinary means. And all the known small worlds are basically controlled by the country. If you want to enter them and create your own skills, you need to make certain reports and assessments. This makes everyone have to study accordingly. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 107. An exam like this to create a personal skill would definitely not be too strict. After all, it is something that belongs to him personally. If he doesn't care about it, how can you still force it? But no matter what, you at least need to know something. If you know nothing at all, it will definitely be impossible to pass the exam. With such an obvious thing happening in China, it is naturally impossible for people outside China to be unaware of it. However, they actually hold a half-believing attitude towards what the Chinese official announced, such as the creation of exercises and the cultivation of immortality. In fact, if it hadn't been for the appearance of Xiao Shandi, they would not have believed this at all. They would have just thought that it was something done by Shenzhou to confuse their hearing and hearing. However, after the appearance of Little World and those strange and fierce ghosts, things became complicated and confusing. After all, such mysterious things are real. However, despite this, leaders of many countries are still skeptical about this. Because, since these things occurred, not only China has been actively seeking solutions, but other countries outside China are also working hard to find solutions. The Holy See of Light, paladins, wizards, magic, and even non-human beings belonging to the dark side, such as werewolves, vampires, or the Dark Council. They have thought of all methods, including the legendary practitioners of Taoism, Qi training, and witchcraft on the land of China. These are the directions that these countries have pursued. Even some time ago, there were spies who reported back to the country that there were some practitioners in China, but it only aroused the laughter of the leaders of these countries. After all, they had already done in-depth research on these so-called practices, and the facts proved that they were just some nonsense. Therefore, they may not understand too much about the revival of spiritual energy taking place on the land of China. But they still think they know a lot about the spiritual practice spread by Chinese officials. It's just that facts have proven that these legendary things are just nonsense. How can there be any real practice and real transcendence? If there are, they are also the weird and ghosts in the supernatural area, or the people who use the power of these weird and ghosts. Therefore, compared with the official propaganda of China, what about spiritual energy recovery, practicing immortality, and so on? They are more willing to believe that the mask covering the entire Qingping mountain is some kind of technological weapon newly developed by China. It is precisely because of this that after the incident occurred, all countries outside China, as if they had made an appointment, made condolence calls to the leaders of China, expressing their concern for the recovery of spiritual energy and those weird ghosts. And they all mentioned it implicitly, explicitly, or covertly, that they all knew what the so-called spiritual energy recovery was, and it was just some new technological weapons. And now is the critical moment for the entire Blue Star. The entire Blue Star human race needs to work together and make progress together. If there are any secret and effective technologies, they should be shared with each other. Naturally, the leaders of China are well aware of this. However, they did not intend to explain it in depth. They just repeatedly emphasized that it was not a technological weapon, but an anomaly caused by the resurgence of spiritual energy. The more Shenzhou emphasized, the more foreign forces became certain that it was the new technology developed by Shenzhou. They couldn't help but call one after another. Since it was spiritual energy recovery, it should be related to the entire Blue Star human race, and everyone needed to work together to study it. Therefore, many national forces are speaking out one after another, hoping to enter the dangerous spiritual energy recovery zone and help China conduct joint research. In this regard, China's leaders have always responded with a moderate response. The people of China are capable of coping with any crisis and do not need support from other countries for the time being. As for wanting to get into it and study it in depth, well, the territory of China is sacred and inviolable. Non-nationals are prohibited from entering the land deep in the mainland of China. Threat of war? Haha, the land of China, have never been afraid of war. As for the temptation of profit? Well, it's not non-negotiable. It just depends on how sincere you can be. Anyway, as long as they are not allowed to enter Xiaoshanti and are only in the area around Qingping Mountain, I'm afraid they won't be able to figure out the reason. As for whether the practice will be leaked, and what can we learn from the public? These elite researchers probably don't have much opportunity to come into contact with ordinary people. What they can come into contact with will only be what China officials let them come into contact with. As for the leakage of the exercises, the place is too big, and there are thousands of people with thousands of faces. Not everyone has the consciousness not to teach such popular exercises to people abroad. Not to mention the spies who betrayed state secrets and the large number of foreigners who already existed in these cities. Therefore, regarding the popular meditation method and the theoretical guidance of creative exercises, the leaders of China had no intention of hiding it for a long time, or even prepared to hide it. All they need is a chance to seize the opportunity. It is to develop as much as possible before other countries can react. Moreover, in fact, China now has a huge advantage. The cultivation of the method has almost been popularized throughout the army, and a large number of religious people have also practiced it. So, in this era of the revival of spiritual energy, Shenzhou has walked ahead of all countries and is no longer afraid of any challenges. Moreover, as time goes by, the proportion of extraordinary people is getting heavier and heavier. I am afraid that by then, other countries will not even have the opportunity to challenge. Naturally, the leaders of Shenzhou don't care much about the outflow of those knowledge of the method. And facing the big blackmail of Shenzhou, the leaders of other countries can only pinch their noses and accept it at this time. They have taken out many cutting-edge technologies that Shenzhou does not have, as well as various precious resources, in exchange for the qualification to enter the area covered by spiritual energy. Well, this is on the surface, and behind the scenes, there are a large number of spies, both open and secret, under various banners, and through various means, entering the cities around Qingping Mountain. Even many hidden agents who have been lurking for many years have been activated at this time. Some people enter through regular channels such as tourism, and some people enter by smuggling. Don't ask what kind of smuggling can actually enter the heartland of China. Oh, no matter when, any country or force, there are always those scums who sell out the country and the interests of the nation for personal gain. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 108. As for the many spies who poured into Qingping Mountain, the leaders of China were naturally well aware of it, but they did not take any strict precautions because there was no need to do so. After the spiritual energy of Qingping Mountain's small world completely exploded and poured into Blue Star, the spiritual energy of other small worlds also became more and more active. Many practitioners and leaders are aware of it. It seems that other small worlds are about to erupt with spiritual energy. It seems that the entire Blue Star world is about to completely enter the era of spiritual energy recovery. Since the spiritual energy is about to undergo a large-scale recovery, what is the need for China to prevent those people from entering Qingping Mountain? As long as they are not allowed to enter Xiaoshandi, it is enough. On the contrary, China began a large-scale sweep and arrest operation for those spies who had been lurking in China. As for this, Qingping Mountain is even more eye-catching. Although other countries are somewhat unswerving, they are not intolerable. Isn't it just losing some secrets that have been laid out for many years? Let's just rearrange it. And even when the outside world is causing disturbances, the villa area at the foot of Qingping Mountain is still peaceful, as if the chaos in the world cannot disturb this place at all. Squinting his eyes slightly, Yuan Meng was still lying on the couch in the courtyard, rocking the couch as usual, as if he was enjoying the warm sunshine of the dog days. Well, that's it. For Yuan Meng, the hot sunshine in the dog days is really like the warm sunshine in early spring. It's not a problem at all. On the contrary, it can add a little bit of yang fire attribute power to him. In the villa behind, Yu's hiking retracted his inadvertent glance, and the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. This guy can no longer be described as a homebody, but also a loser. He is either lying down or on his way to lie down. He sleeps on the bed at night and on the couch during the day. As long as no one disturbs him, he will never move. Hee. You didn't mention it was windy and rainy. I think he was probably lying in bed when it rained, hee. Listening to Yu's hiking seemingly complaining and angry words, Wang Xinhui couldn't help but purse her lips and chuckle. Yuan Meng, who was lying on the recliner, twitched the corners of his mouth slightly and ignored the couple who slandered him. Instead, he let his mind go out, in line with the will of heaven and earth, and looked at the area around Qingping Mountain from a higher dimension that was enveloped by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. The endless aura power stimulates, against the rules of the blue star's heaven and earth, forming a layer of brilliance visible to the naked eye at the boundary of the aura-covered area, which is a light mask in everyone's eyes. Moreover, This layer of light curtain visible to the naked eye is still slowly advancing outward at a speed invisible to the naked eye. In fact, when the spiritual energy first spreads, after reaching a certain level, let alone continuing to expand, it is already very difficult to not be crushed by the rules of the blue star world. However, as the Chinese official department announced the recovery of spiritual energy and the practice of martial arts, the situation began to improve rapidly. After everyone knows that the spiritual energy is revived, and has the skills to practice it, and is able to practice it, especially after everyone sincerely recognized this fact, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, which is extremely susceptible to the influence of human hearts, was immediately affected by human thoughts. If it were normal in a world dominated by materialism, the so-called thoughts of the human heart would not have much meaning. However, with the weather aura that is easily influenced by people's hearts, the situation is completely different. Endless fragments of thoughts emanate from countless people and merge into the surrounding aura of heaven and earth. All kinds of spiritual thoughts about the revival of spiritual energy, about the small world, etc., under the blessing and fusion of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, exerted unimaginable power. The endless spiritual power, combined with the aura of heaven and earth, began to fight against the oppression of the rules of heaven and earth, from the initial difficult resistance to the mutual stalemate later. By the end, the area covered by the spiritual energy had begun to gradually expand outward. And not only that, the endless spiritual power began to crazily impact the rules of the blue star's world, causing it to gradually loosen and show signs of becoming active. If the rules of the blue star world become fully active, then blue star, which has strict rules, will completely enter an era of idealism and materialism. In a world with only a materialistic worldview, the so-called human mind power naturally has no effect. But after adding the idealistic spiritual energy of heaven and earth, it began to produce shocking power. It actually began to gradually stir up the rules of heaven and earth, making it gradually accept the power of idealism. The so-called human heart and heavenly mind are nothing more than this. After feeling the aura of heaven and earth emanating from Buzhu Mountain's small world, he didn't need to control it at all and could resist Blue Star's rules of heaven and earth. Yuan Meng was completely relieved and took another look at the ancient world. Seeing that although it suddenly became a lot more chaotic due to the influx of so many people's distracting thoughts, it also became increasingly vibrant. Yuan Meng frowned slightly, but he was also secretly happy. Naturally, it is impossible for everyone to have the same thoughts about people's thoughts. Even if the country announces the revival of spiritual energy, after practicing the exercises, it is impossible for everyone to do nothing all day long and only think about the recovery of spiritual energy and the practice of exercises. The reason why the spiritual thoughts such as the revival of spiritual energy, cultivation of skills, and small worlds that impact the rules of the world on Blue Star is that Yuan Meng separated them. Regarding the spiritual thoughts such as the revival of spiritual energy, cultivation of skills, and small worlds, Yuan Meng used them to impact the rules of the world on Blue Star. And the rest of the messy thoughts were all included in the prehistoric world by Yuan Meng. These various thoughts immediately produced a chemical reaction after entering the idealistic prehistoric world. The relatively unified and clearly directed miscellaneous thoughts began to gather together purposefully, forming a group of demon embryos. As for those prehistoric gods, there were endless spiritual thoughts swarming towards them. This was originally a good thing, because it would make their power even more magnificent. However, as the saying goes, there are thousands of faces for thousands of people, and thousands of methods for thousands of people. All these spiritual thoughts certainly cannot have only one idea. These miscellaneous thoughts containing infinite information gathered on one person in a short period of time, what consequences would that cause? Mental disorder and spiritual ignorance, that is inevitable. If the source of these spiritual thoughts came from the primitive world, they would only be the nourishment for the advancement of those innate sacred beings and demon gods. However, these spiritual thoughts came from the real world of a higher dimension. Even though the primitive world has transformed 7 times in succession, it is still not enough to face the things from the real Blue Star world. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 109. Compared to the power of the innate gods and demons, the infinite fragments of spiritual thoughts that poured into the prehistoric world are still much higher in essence, enough to pose a fatal threat to them. 3, 5, or 10 people are fine. Under the blessing of the rules of the prehistoric world, these innate gods and demons can naturally sort them out and bring them under control. However, in just this short period of time, countless people's spiritual thoughts poured into it. This made these innate gods and demon embryos completely polluted and sunk in the messy sea of information. And these are those spiritual thoughts with relatively unified and clear directions. And more are those chaotic and disordered spiritual thoughts. These mixed spiritual thoughts, some of which are similar in nature, will instinctively move closer to each other and merge together to form embryos. As for what kind of creatures these embryos will give birth to, even UN men can hardly know before they are born. There are also many spiritual thoughts that directly merge with the entire prehistoric world, and derive many, similar to the heavenly world and the underworld, which exist in the infinite dimensions of the 3 realms. UN men is happy about the changes in the prehistoric world, but there are also many places of worry. Most of the embryos that merge endless and complicated thoughts are relatively unified, and the innate sacred and demon gods with clear directions are okay. No matter how many complicated thoughts it merges, it looks so chaotic and evil on the outside, the most divine and holy, the most evil and evil. But at its core, there is always a trace of order divinity, which is slightly fluctuating and nurtured by the endless chaotic information and power. Because of the power of that trace of order divinity, these innate sacred and demon gods finally have the opportunity to awaken themselves and wake up from the endless chaos. But the others, which have no unified core at all, are just because of similar attributes, and then merge together to form embryos, but they are just filled with endless chaotic information and power. UN men can't see the opportunity for them to awaken themselves. UN men was very hesitant about these embryos, not knowing whether to let them continue to exist or to destroy them directly. If they cannot awaken themselves, they will lose the ability to continue to grow. Letting them continue to exist is really not of much benefit and value to the prehistoric world. However, UN men was also reluctant to destroy them directly. It was not because he was soft-hearted, but because the core of these chaotic embryos also contained a trace of the prototype of the illusory avenue. Although the prototype of the illusory avenue contained in these chaotic embryos also appeared to be extremely chaotic and disorganized. However, who can be sure that these chaotic illusory avenues will not eventually evolve into reality? After all, in many novels, there are chaotic avenues. As for saying that it is just a novel interpretation. Hey! The world is so big, who can say clearly that there are really no such things? Although the two are not the same concept at all. The chaotic avenues in those novels are the avenues that are named and conceptualized by chaos and then evolved and proved. In UN Meng's prehistoric world, the illusory chaotic avenues contained in those embryos are nothing more than a variety of different rules, concepts, and information, which are forcibly mixed by those mixed spiritual thoughts to form an illusory avenue. If it weren't for the current prehistoric world, it would have been an idealistic semi-illusory world. The spiritual thoughts from the real world are even more fundamentally superior to the innate sacred and demon gods. These messy spiritual embryos cannot forcibly mix various different rules, concepts, and information to form a series of seemingly illusory avenues. However, this is a possible direction after all. If it is directly erased, it is naturally not difficult for UN men. Directly separate and scatter those mixed spiritual thoughts and throw them into the prehistoric world. With the power of the Xuxian sword formation, which is now greatly increased, it is enough to completely destroy them, transform them into pure spiritual power, and integrate them into the prehistoric world. However, after hesitating for a long time, Yuan Meng did not scatter them after all. Alas! Let's see what luck you will have in the future. After confirming that the area covered by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was completely stable, and that the prehistoric world was relatively stable, Yuan Meng was about to descend into the small world of the East China Sea through the prehistoric world. Why did Yuan Meng, who was already in the small world of the East China Sea, go through the prehistoric world again? Well, if someone traces back time in the future, they will find that the one who controlled the revival of the spiritual energy of Blue Star was not the prehistoric world as everyone thought. It was the salted fish who first had the practice method and stayed in the villa. Although this situation is basically impossible, even if someone can reach that situation, he will be fearless at that time. After all, others have reached the realm of being able to trace back time through practice. He, the creator of the chaotic prehistoric world, the source of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, will he always stay where he is? At that time, he might have had plenty of ways to erase all remaining traces. Even if someone discovered it, could it have any impact on him at that time? However, there is absolutely no need for him to do this. Since it can be avoided at the beginning, why not avoid it as much as possible, but have to clean up the mess later? Of course, no matter what happens in the future, what he has to do now is to also activate the small world of East China Sea, so that the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in it will spread into the Blue Star world. When Yuan Meng's mind came, he directly arrived in the shallow regular sea of the small world of the East China Sea. Here, various different rules of heaven and earth are crisscrossed to form an ocean of rules. In this ocean of rules, there is a large amount of active spiritual energy of heaven and earth, and it is still continuously absorbing a large amount of pure energy from the deeper dimensions of time and space in the small world. After Puyi appeared, these pure energies were decomposed and swallowed by the endless spiritual energy of heaven and earth, transforming into more spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Looking around, the entire ocean of rules, which can also be called the ocean of heaven and earth aura, is vast and endless. Well, if it weren't for today, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the small world would be spread to the big Blue Star world. In Yuan Meng's prehistoric world, the phenomenon of energy being nearly exhausted due to the advanced transformation of the world will not occur. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 110. If it is said that the energies provided by so many small real worlds are not enough to fully supply the illusory prehistoric world, then that is really a joke. Can't the hundreds and thousands of small worlds in the entire Shenzhou supply the advancement of a semi-illusory prehistoric world? Even if the current prehistoric world looks extremely vast, it is only an illusory world after all. Although it is gradually transforming into reality, it even has many real concepts and rules. But as long as the prehistoric world does not achieve reality, it is just an illusory world compared to the real world. Even if it only relies on the power and various rules provided by these small worlds today, it is enough to support the prehistoric world and completely transform into reality. After all, the illusory is illusory. Often, a ray of pure energy in the real world is enough to transform into an energy ocean in the prehistoric world. What's more, the energy required for the transformation of the illusory into the real is actually extremely huge, but it is really not as huge as imagined. The most important thing is the various real rules and concepts. After Yuan Meng's mind and will descended to the ocean of rules in the East China Sea, it did not manifest itself, but appeared in the form of a group of will of heaven and earth. Since he had planned to act cautiously and try to erase the traces of his original body, why not be more cautious? After Yuan Meng descended, his mind and will violently shook and impacted the chaotic aura in the ocean of rules, which had been suppressed to the limit, and caused it to tremble and be pushed away from the ocean of rules. And that chaotic aura was naturally the ghost that was once the pseudo-world consciousness of the small world. Now Yuan Meng, in this small world, has truly reached the same level as the ghost. Before, Although the ghost was easily suppressed by Yuan Meng, it was caused by the difference in power between the two. However, at the level of life essence, the ghost formed by the pseudo-world consciousness was actually higher than Yuan Meng. Yuan Meng could not cause any substantial harm to it. What he suppressed was just the manifestation of the ghost's external consciousness. If it were not for its chaotic thinking and lack of reason, through the core consciousness of the origin that was placed on the shallow rules of the small world, it had already broken free and transformed itself in other places in the small world. But that was before. Now that the two are at the same level, Yuan Meng naturally no longer needs to suppress the manifestation of his external consciousness. As long as the core consciousness of the origin that is integrated with the shallow rules is suppressed, it can no longer manifest in the small world. However, it is precisely because Yuan Meng is now at the same level as the pseudo-world consciousness in these small worlds. This also leads to the fact that the power that Yuan Meng possesses and controls is far greater than that of the pseudo-world consciousness. However, if you want to completely separate the pseudo-world consciousness from the ocean of rules, or even completely erase it, it is by no means something that can be done in a short time. You can only separate it a little at a time, and slowly separate it completely from the ocean of rules, so that it can be annihilated. From this, it can be seen that Yuan Meng is still a long way from becoming the true will of the world in the small world. Otherwise, it wouldn't be that Yuan Meng couldn't do anything with just a little spiritual light in the shallow ocean of rules in the small world. It's because Yuan Meng and that little spiritual light are just in this shallow ocean of rules, and there is no difference in essence. Just like the legendary prehistoric saint, no matter how powerful the saint is, he can even kill other saints, but he can still be resurrected through the true spirit in the heavenly way. Except for losing some face, there is no real loss. Of course, like Hung Jun, who completely integrates the body with the way and becomes the spokesperson of the heavenly way, it is an exception. That is to a certain extent, beyond the level of the saint. Therefore, unless Yuan Meng's power is strong enough to completely break through this ocean of rules, he can easily destroy the little spiritual light of the pseudo-world consciousness. Otherwise, he can only eliminate that little spiritual light bit by bit as before, and finally achieve the purpose of destroying it. However, as Yuan Meng continued to grow and erode the small world, his control over the small world also continued to deepen. In the end, Yuan Meng could even control the ocean of rules and directly wipe out that bit of spiritual light. And this day is not far away. As Yuan Meng's mind moved, the entire vast ocean of rules began to turbulent violently. A trace of the power of rules rippled and instantly passed through the ocean of rules, the time and space dimension gap between the real world and the real world, and spread to the entire small world. Boom! In the villa behind, the couple who were constantly lamenting Yuan Meng's death felt that the surrounding world seemed to be swept by some invisible force, and made a dull sound. At this moment, the two felt that their brains were blank and lost all external and internal perceptions. The turbulence of the power of rules was completely unmatched and unstoppable for the two people in the small world. The two had no reaction at all, and were stunned by the turbulence of the power of rules, and could not recover for a long time. When the two finally came to their senses, this small world had undergone earth-shaking changes. A huge amount of spiritual energy, even close to liquefaction, came from nowhere and filled every corner of this small world. The two felt difficulty breathing, as if they were in the deep sea. The spiritual energy of the world that was full of liquefaction was like a shark smelling blood, rushing into their bodies violently. It's so uncomfortable. Wang Xinhui's pretty face was red, and she cried out with great difficulty. Yu's Hiking, who was beside her, was not much better, and his face was also red. However, seeing his wife's uncomfortable appearance, he still spoke with difficulty to comfort her. Although this is dangerous, it is also a rare opportunity. Hurry up and practice your cultivation method to refine these spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Yes. Wang Xinhui nodded slightly, squeezed out a word from her nose, indicating that she understood, and then closed her eyes and began to practice the method she had learned. As his technique was working, the pain that seemed to burst his body was finally relieved a little. Moreover, his cultivation began to surge wildly, and the energy in his body quickly filled his danshan, then overflowed from his danshan, running through all the acupoints in his body, and each meridian slowly underwent a qualitative change. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 111. Looking at his wife's expression, Xuanhuan, who had gradually calmed down, breathed a sigh of relief and began to practice his own skills, quickly breaking through his cultivation and relieving the pressure on his body. Yuan Meng, who was sitting on the recliner, suddenly let out a light sigh, and his eyes swept slightly to the back of the villa, sighing slightly. Should we say that humans are worthy of being the leader of all spirits? No matter what the situation is, there will always be some existences that can create miracles. Although the qualitative change of the Yuan force in Xuanhuan and Wang Xinhui's bodies is not at the same dimensional level as the transformation of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, but it has undergone a certain qualitative change after all, and it has exceeded the ordinary spiritual energy of heaven and earth by a little bit. And the transformation of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth belongs to the rule level, the transformation of the root. And the qualitative change of the Yuan force in Xuanhuan and Wang Xinhui's bodies is just the fusion of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth with the spirit of the two people, under the pressure of the external environment. Following their inner instincts, they continued to concentrate their internal energy to avoid being blown up by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth that was pouring in from the outside world. As a result, the energy in their bodies began to gather towards one point, and under various coincidences, a certain degree of qualitative change occurred. Although this qualitative change of energy seemed to be more powerful, in fact, it only changed the externality of energy, and did not touch the level of rules and roots. The impact on the spiritual energy of heaven and earth itself was even more negligible. However, no matter how negligible it was, it also had an impact on the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Even if Yuan Meng could expand and analyze this subtle change, he could strengthen the spiritual energy of heaven and earth itself. This made Yuan Meng secretly happy. He was right in this step. He had just implemented the plan of spiritual energy recovery, and he had already gained a little extra. And with the thorough implementation of the spiritual energy recovery plan, all the human beings in Shenzhou and even the entire Blue Star will be included in it. How much will it gain? However, this kind of thing actually makes Yuan Meng alert. The speed of transformation of his world's spiritual energy must be ahead of everyone else. If there is really a genius with extraordinary talent, who suddenly understands the essence of spiritual energy, eliminates external influences, and condenses his own unique power, then for Yuan Meng, it will definitely be a huge variable. After all, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth is under the absolute control of Yuan Meng. However, under the influence of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, the rules of heaven and earth begin to loosen and become active, but the Blue Star world is absolutely not affected and controlled by Yuan Meng. And if there is that person, who is favored by the gradually active rules of the Blue Star world, it is not necessarily that Yuan Meng, who violates the Blue Star world, will be killed directly on the road. After all, compared with the entire Blue Star, the difference between Yuan Meng and the entire Blue Star is completely beyond reason, and his influence on humans is only through the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. If someone really abandoned the spiritual energy of heaven and earth and was favored by the Blue Star, it would be possible that Yuan Meng would die. Therefore, if possible, when Yuan Meng was reviving the spiritual energy and popularizing the practice to all mankind, his own progress speed should also be constantly accelerated. It would be best if he had grown to a point that others could not catch up with before everyone else grew up. Of course, now is not the time to think about those things. Yuan Meng looked up and saw the endless spiritual energy of heaven and earth surging up, rushing straight into the endless sky, and turned into a pillar of light. However, this pillar of light was rapidly fading, and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth contained in it was also gradually spreading outward. The reason for this is naturally because an area outside the small world of the East China Sea has long been covered by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Except at the beginning, because the spiritual energy of heaven and earth suddenly erupted, the erupting spiritual energy of heaven and earth was too violent. This led to a certain conflict with the rules of the world of Blue Star, and the spiritual light that bloomed formed a pillar of light that spread to the sky. It did not form a light curtain that spread outward, but gradually dissipated into the invisible. Of course, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth will definitely not dissipate, they just silently and quickly merged into the outside world. And this time, facing the endless spiritual light that spread violently, no one thought of dodging, but looked at it with expectation. Unfortunately, everyone was obviously disappointed. They saw that the pillar of spiritual light that spread to the sky only lasted for a moment and spread a distance of several thousand meters. Then, it was gradually collapsing and dissipating, and finally turned into a little starlight and dissipated in the world. This made everyone extremely surprised and disappointed. But soon, everyone discovered the abnormality again. I saw that the spiritual light shield that had been covering the entire area around Qingping Mountain after the spiritual energy was revived began to expand rapidly at this time. 10 meters, 100 meters, 1,000 meters, 10 miles, 100 miles, and finally, the range covered by the spiritual light shield expanded by more than hundreds of miles before it barely stopped. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth in this area also became more concentrated. The place with the most concentrated spiritual energy is naturally the small world of the East China Sea in Yuan Meng's villa. Yuz Hiking and Wang Xinhui opened their eyes almost at the same time, and a touch of joy flashed across their eyes. Finally a breakthrough. Yuz Hiking flipped his palm, and a flash of bright silver flashed across his face. As he waved his palm, the coffee table in front of him silently split into 2 pieces. Then it fell to the ground with a bang and broke into dozens of pieces. What are you doing? Looking at the broken coffee table in front of her, Wang Xinhui couldn't help but give Yuz Hiking an annoyed look. Ah! Ha 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 ha! Mistake! Mistake! Isn't this finally a breakthrough? I was overly excited for the moment, hee hee. Yuz Hiking scratched his head awkwardly, feeling quite embarrassed. Humph. Why don't you help me clean it up quickly? Wang Xinhui snorted and prepared to clear away the broken coffee table. Oh. I'll come, I've caused trouble, how can I let my wife take action? Yuz Hiking quickly stepped forward and picked up the broken coffee table on the ground. That's pretty much it? Yuan Meng, who was lying on the recliner, quickly retracted the spiritual thoughts that he had inadvertently swept over. He couldn't help but feel quite tired. You are showing off your affection there. Have you ever considered the feeling of being single? After feeling the stability of the small world and the spiritual energy of the outside world, Yuan Meng felt relieved. Finally, everything was going well and there were no uncontrollable phenomena. Immediately, Yuan Meng closed his eyes again, and his mind and will passed through the ancient world and came to other small worlds again. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 112. As for what happened in Yujukan's school, including the noisy crowd, Yuan Meng didn't pay too much attention to it. Instead, he separated the people's thoughts here to a certain extent, leaving the idea of reviving the spiritual energy and practicing the exercises, and then transferred his mind and will to other small worlds after integrating the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to impact the rules of the Blue Star world. In this way, According to the order in which he controlled the small worlds, Yuan Meng activated these small worlds one by one, and thick spiritual light pillars shot up into the sky. Then they spread rapidly, forming inverted spiritual light shields, covering one piece of blue star world after another. This scene of spiritual energy bursting, light pillars shooting up into the sky, and spreading to form spiritual light shields lasted for 3 days before it gradually came to an end. After seeing that there were no more light pillars shooting up into the sky, the senior leaders of Shenzhou breathed a sigh of relief. But it finally stopped. For the past 3 days, their mood has been tightly lifted. There is no way. The spiritual energy recovery this time was too unexpected, and the commotion it caused was too big. It turned out that in the land of Shenzhou, all the small worlds with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth were fully recovered within these 3 days, which was also a great pressure on the country's security. Fortunately, soon after the spiritual energy of heaven and earth continued to burst and recover, the country also summed up some rules, that is, the burst and recovery of spiritual energy was carried out in the order of the birth of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, which relieved some of the country's pressure. It is not necessary for the whole country to mobilize all the efforts at the same time. And just when everyone felt that they could finally breathe a sigh of relief, a report came up and broke their fantasy again. The spiritual energy of all the areas covered by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth is constantly fluctuating at a certain frequency. And this fluctuation is still constantly tending to be consistent, and even the spiritual energy covered areas connected to each other have gradually begun to produce a certain resonance. Obviously, this is definitely not a normal phenomenon. In an instant, the spirits of many senior leaders of Shenzhou were tense again. Thus, all the military and political systems of the entire Shenzhou began to run rapidly again, just like a machine with a spring wound up. Obviously, the development of things will not be affected by human will. When Shenzhou was not fully prepared, the vibration frequencies of many areas covered by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth had already completely converged, and they resonated with each other. Buzz. First, the areas covered by the spiritual energy that were close to each other began to expand rapidly again with a dull hum. However, this time the expansion was mostly towards each other, and as for other directions, the distance expanded was negligible. And the speed of their expansion was getting faster and faster, from the initial inaccessible to the naked eye, to the visible to the naked eye, and finally to the inaccessible again. It was too slow at first, and it was too fast later. Finally, at the boundary covered by the spiritual energy of both sides, the spiritual energy shield that collided with the rules of the blue star and the heaven and earth and stimulated it completely contacted and merged together silently. Boom. Buzz. Accompanied by a dull sound, an invisible force instantly swept through all the covered areas of both sides, causing the two areas covered by spiritual energy to merge into a larger spiritual energy covered area. And this is not the end. The spiritual energy covered area formed by the fusion began to resonate with other similar areas, and pulled each other to expand and merge together. In the end, all the areas that were covered by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth and covered by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth were completely merged together. At this moment, the endless spiritual energy covered area of heaven and earth has almost covered the entire land of Shenzhou. Especially after all the areas were merged, it seemed that some kind of qualitative change had occurred. In an instant, the extremely huge spiritual energy cover began to expand again. However, this time, the expansion time was very short, only about an hour. And in this hour, the area covered by spiritual energy has completely spread throughout the entire Shenzhou, and even exceeded a lot, including many small countries around, and some territories of other countries. Perhaps it was because the spiritual energy of heaven and earth covered too much of the blue star world at once, which triggered a certain stress response of the rules of the blue star world. The more powerful force of the rules of oppression enveloped the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, causing the spiritual energy at the boundary of the area covered by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to release more powerful power to resist the rules of heaven and earth of Blue Star. The dazzling spiritual light bloomed, and even in the daytime, it was still clearly visible at a distance of dozens of miles. And at night, it was even within a range of hundreds of miles, all as if it was daytime. Even as long as someone looked up, they could see a layer of light curtain above the sky. Not to mention that the sky and earth were as bright as day, it was like a bright moon hanging high. The endless spiritual energy of heaven and earth was violently agitated here, and even because of the fierce collision between different rules, the large amount of spiritual energy gathered here already had a certain texture. It was no longer like before, completely illusory, like an illusion, which could only be perceived by the mind, but could not be touched by the body. At this moment, when passing through this layer of light curtain, some resistance can be felt. The aura light curtain, which was originally only a few meters thick, is now hundreds of thousands of meters thick. Although the overall distance is not far, but within this range, it is all white. The fierce collision between the rules has caused the magnetic field here to be chaotic and disordered, which can already affect people's senses. In other words, if a person enters it without any defense, there is a high probability that he will never get out again, and will only keep circling in it under the influence of the chaotic magnetic field. And the emergence of this situation was not expected by even Yuan Meng. Yuan Meng thought of many scenarios, and Blue Star did not react much. It still formed a thin layer of aura light curtain as before. In addition, the rules of the world of Blue Star were activated, and it completely entered an era where idealism, materialism, technology, and practice coexisted. In addition, the rules of the world of Blue Star reacted too strongly to the aura of the world, causing Yuan Meng's plan to fail directly. But he never thought that things would develop to this point. In fact, if only the spiritual energy of heaven and earth spread, it would not lead to the current situation. The greater possibility is that it completely aroused the stress response of Blue Star, and the area covered by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was completely crushed. At that time, there would be no spiritual energy of heaven and earth, and even Yuan Meng himself would be fatally injured, and the current situation would not occur.